Yeah, I just wanted to jump right into it. This Some of these games were from Reddit, some of them were from the Chess Study Group Discord, yeah, ready to get started. Let's take a look. Um, this is an interesting game. Basically looks like a pretty one-sided win for White, but let's go quickly through it and see where the specifics are. Um, okay. Vienna game, knight c3, going up against bishop c5. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, so it looks like a pretty strong win for white. Let's just take a look. Okay. So, Vienna game is interesting. Basically, in the Vienna game, white plays a less challenging second, basically, hey, good morning, Aphelion, how are you? How's it going? Um, so basically, white plays a relatively unchallenging knight to c3. Knight to f3 requires a response generally from black. I'm doing good. Yeah, yeah, good to be back streaming. I got a bunch of games today, and yeah, good. It's today's actually the final day of my cybersecurity course. And then after that, I'm gonna have at least a little bit more free time. I'm starting another course. Another course that I'm doing starts today, so I'm not gonna have a ton of free time, but today's the last day of my course, so I'm happy about that, and I'm gonna be on to the next one. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, I had my final project. I finished my final project yesterday, so I'm more or less done, which is good. But yeah, it'll be good. Um, uh, I'm pretty sure I passed. I'd be very surprised if I didn't pass. So we're in a good place with that. So basically, this is a pretty standard Vienna game situation where it's knight c3 and bishop c4 against c5. Most common here is knight f6, and you respond d3 to that. This is a pretty solid formation for white. I guess basically d5 needs to be kind of set up here. So c6 and d5. But attacks involving bishop g5 can come in, particularly if black plays d6 here, which he sometimes does. Hey, good morning, Kiro. How are you? So basically bishop g5, but bishop g5 pins on this knight, and with d6, knight d5 becomes a very strong. Good morning, Hyperion. Um, yeah, so basically every good morning, Jack. Cool. Yeah, a lot of people here, which is awesome. But yeah, so I was basically looking at this and good morning, GM Shadow. So basically, this formation with D3 is the most common. F4 is also sometimes played here. This sort of transposes into the Falkbeer Gambit type structures for white. Here, knight F6. Good morning, Mario. Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. This is great. So with knight f3, knight c3, and bishop to c4, this is a pretty good white pawn structure. I'm pretty sure. I guess this opening for the queen on h4 could become a little bit tricky, but but yeah, this basically promises white good development, and on one d3, basically on d3 on the next move, white's gonna have pretty healthy places for his pieces. His kingside safety might be a little bit compromised, but don't think it will be anything that will be too disruptive to his position. So d3, bnd, pawn takes, next knight takes. Basically, the engine's giving a pretty favorable eval to black. I'm not sure exactly why. This looks good for white. It looks like this attack is beginning. I think part of the favorable eval to black is the fact that this bishop prevents white from castling kingside throughout this game. But I think if white's willing to castle queenside, this position's just fine. Once white castles kingside, the eval goes to 1.5 pretty quickly. So overall, I think the analysis is a little bit quick to give an edge to black here. Overall, it looks like a pretty solid game. Just going over from the beginning, this was a Vienna game with an early f4, knight f3, knight f6, d4, queen, bishop e6, bishop takes f4, castles. Pretty straightforward, no real problems for white here, and uh, and awesome. Basically, threats on d4 potentially, but overall, I think white has way better attacking chances here. It's really going to be about execution and how quickly he can launch an attack against black with his active pieces. Um, b4, bishop b1, c5, a3, knight c6, and white has full center control, and this this advantage is basically consolidating. D5 could be a push that white wants to try. This pawn is backwards. Maybe potentially pairing it with like queen c2 or something like that, and then having the ability to play queen h7. Um, but white instead goes for this tactic, which is strong, and yeah, looks like white's got a pretty solid lead. Black's got an open king side, and this pawn structure provides a connected pass pawn for white. Um, Strong. Well, pretty well played. I'm thinking about inefficiencies for white here. Inefficiencies in this game. F4. The engine doesn't like. And okay, so this is something that's important. This tactic is better for black. I've had this happen in a few games. It does happen. Where basically in this Falkbeer gambit, you need to be careful to prevent bishop takes g1. Bishop takes g1 allows the most dangerous concept here, which is queen to h4 to occur. Because the rook has to retake on g1, g3 gets played, and queen takes h2. And this is really just, it's sort of a move order type transposition. Basically, if white's making all the correct opening moves. I mean, this is fine, and on pawn takes, white is fine, but this f4 in this specific situation where the bishop's already out allows for that bishop takes g1, queen h4 move order. So this is definitely something to be avoided. I don't know if there's a great way to avoid this except for just first just evaluating tactical play at least to some degree in your openings. I guess you could also memorize that f4 is bad, or f4 is bad if the knight is on g1 and there's an open h4 file. Um, but on bishop takes g1, rook takes g1, queen to h4, g3. Yeah, this queen h2 provides an opportunity for white. It didn't happen in this game, that is definitely a situation that's better for black. Sometimes it gets tricky to evaluate these situations where bishop takes g1, rook takes g1, queen h4, g3, queen takes h2, and it's sort of tricky. Is black really winning here? His queen's displaced. His king side is open in case that the rook wants to take the f file later. But this in this particular case, this is pretty objectively good for black. It's not a poison pawn; it's a hung pawn. So on bishop takes g1, f4, bishop takes g1, rook takes g1, queen h4, and black is winning here. But anyways, it doesn't black instead plays pawn takes f4, and after knight f3 white is fine. But that's just something to keep in mind playing these early f4 openings against c5. Bishop takes g1 can be a dangerous tactic for white. Rook e8, rook e1, and yeah, this is a pretty straightforward, slightly better position for white. White now has healthy development. His king safety is good, and he has complete control of the center. So overall, pretty safe position for white. Black's gonna need to come up with some kind of unusual pawn move to break through the solid center here, like potentially c5, potentially d5, maybe, but I prefer c5. C5 would block the bishop's diagonal, but white needs to do something to disrupt, or black needs to do something to disrupt white's center, because this is overall just too solid to break through. Um, anyways, yeah, so c4, knight b4, bishop b1, c5, a3, knight c6, d5. And here, this is a huge, this is a huge spatial advantage for white against black. Potentially e5, bishop takes. Yeah, no. Aphelion, I has a moderator position. Um, I, uh, I really appreciate all that he's done for the stream. It's been very helpful, like both in the chat and behind the scenes. Really, really helpful stuff. So yeah, Aphelion is doing some moderation work, and really happy to have him have him doing work for the stream. It's very nice of him. So yeah, thank you, Aphelion, for all that you've done to help, and yeah, I hope I really appreciate you continuing to help in the moderating position. Um, so yeah, so this e4 uh uh so basically this c4 e4 d5 structure is pretty solid for white. Maybe d5, knight takes c5. But overall, you can just tell from this development that black is relatively cramped with his pieces. Um, I guess this rook is slightly good in the sense that he has this open file that he could potentially use for an attack. But overall, black's basically in a pretty good or black, white's in a pretty good place with black's development fairly stunted. Maybe e5. I think e5 is probably best. Bishop takes d6 does a basically trades off and also opens up the king side. I think after pawn takes f6, knight f5 is only slightly worse than pawn takes f6. With pawn takes f6, the king side gets a bit open, and that can potentially be problematic. But overall, this looks pretty good for white. Um, you know, I don't want to say what it's hard to decide exactly where white's positional advantages turn into a winning advantage, but it's probably somewhere around here. This is a very good combination for white. He has the connected passed pawn. Black has the open king side, which is going to provide all sorts of vulnerability. Maybe queen d2, but when black has a king side that's open like this, you basically know that an attack is going to be really difficult to stop. Maybe f5, maybe knight g6, but yeah, this is tricky. Knight g6, by the way, hangs queen takes h6. I don't know if that's the best combination. Bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes h6 here. I think looks like the best idea. But this is very close to winning, if not already winning for white. Okay, so the break here. Let's take a look. F4. But yeah, so in terms of correcting white's play, I think this bishop g1 can't really be safely allowed. Here, bishop takes g1, rook takes g1, queen to h4, just something g3, queen takes h2. This can this is pretty straightforwardly something that's good for black. So just I would keep this in mind as a something to avoid as white in this opening. Be careful, with the open h4 diagonal, and make sure that there's no potential tactics for black like bishop takes g1 here. That's just otherwise I think white's basically played a pretty good game. Um, but that's one oversight. Otherwise here, I think so black, black on the opposing side of that tactic, had the opportunity to play bishop takes g1, queen takes h4. So if you're on the opposite side of this, of this Falkbeer type situation, bishop takes g1, forcing rook takes g1. Uh, Yeah, and that pin would be, fairly solid. So knight f3, d4, bishop takes f4, castles, rook e8, and yeah, I mean, I think generally, this is pretty dangerous. But this f4 is misplaced here. It either has to come earlier, like in the general Falkbeer gambit, or basically preparing moves like g3 or something like that needs to be played, or maybe I guess maybe here knight g3, bishop g4 potentially. Yeah, that's probably right. The only thing is that f4 is only playable if knight f3 hasn't already been played. With f4, uh, yeah, basically it's just the risk with f4, which is generally a good move in these types of situations, is this very specific tactical play. With knight e2, then f4 is playable. Um, if you're preparing for this bishop to g4 pin, I don't know, maybe d3 and bishop e3 potentially, but something, that avoids this bishop takes g1 move order. Anyways, this ends up being playing out pretty well for white. His development is healthy. He gets quick center control. Um, in terms of errors here, like I don't know. I mean, basically, Black has sort of not challenged White while he was establishing a good initiative and good center here. If he, White can maintain this center, he's going to be able to walk this 1.4 1.4 pawn advantage into the endgame. This is just a really really healthy developing structure. Um, Black really, basically it plays out almost equal for the rest of the game. Um, I guess there's a tactic here on h3, knight e5. Um, right, executing this pin, right? Because so this was a tactical opportunity for black. So on h3, black could have played knight e5, using this pin on the g1 a7 diagonal. But overall here, I think basically white kind of held a one plus pawn lead into the end game. He ended up using that big center in order to break open the in order to break open the king side with his e pawn. This was a good tactic ultimately. Bishop takes d6, e5, pawn takes f6. That worked out well. And I think basically here, this is yeah, it's good. It's good for white. It basically plays out. It plays out well. Uh, I'm thinking. Yeah, I'm thinking certainly by this point, it's getting close to a win for white. Bishop takes d6, e5 should be almost a win. So in terms of looking at things to improve, I think you have to look earlier than that. Um, but yeah, basically good exercise in terms of taking a look at the weaknesses of f4 in this position. That early bishop takes g1 is a refutation of f4 played in this situation. Um, on the other side, basically here, knight to e5 was actually a very solid tactic for black. The knight gets this unusual looking outpost based on this bishop to g1 threat. Overall here, I think basically white had a spatial advantage. This structure held up well for him. But there were multiple times in this game where f4 kind of showed up as a weakness. F4 is a mixed move basically because it has the potential to create an open file for the rook, which becomes powerful. But on the other side, it does potentially allow for attacks along both the h4 diagonal from the queen and potentially the bishop along the c5 g1 diagonal. So both of those are things that white would need to be kind of aware of, before playing f4. That said, it can be great in terms of generating a quick attack. There's a lot of times when f4 is a very strong move in the Sicilian. undermining the e6 pawn. But here, the only real vulnerability in White's position was that f4 move in this b6 to g1 diagonal. Here, I think White's just sort of safe. This central structure will hold up, and White will be able to use it to exert pressure and ultimately win the game. Yeah, but certainly by here you can see that basically this is sort of late middle game, early into the decisive part. Yeah, I'm good, Squash. Thank you very much for joining the stream. But yeah, so this here shows White with significantly better development. This bishop on b1 is strong, and White's in good shape. e5, pawn takes e5, knight takes e5. Pretty much pretty solid for White. So yeah, solid win for White. The only takeaway was really an opening thing, which had to do with that f4 that f4 move and threats on the g1 knight. White missed it, and then Black missed it. So both sides here, I think, can take a look at that. The weaknesses associated with f4 and how early they occur. It was a situation where I feel like using tactical vision is always important, even when you're still within general opening theory. It was the Falkbeer Gambit, but the Falkbeer Gambit is very different if the bishop is on c5. Cool. Awesome. Thank you very much for the game, and let's go to the next one. Okay. Here's Mario's game. Thank you very much for sending this, Mario. Mario sent via good morning, Tarash. Thanks for joining the stream. Yeah, so Mario's playing White here, so we'll take it from his perspective. It's a d4 opening, Queen's Pawn opening, and yeah, let's take a look. I haven't seen this game before, so I was just gonna play through it quickly. But here, White looks like he gets, yeah, a pretty solid win, similar colored bishop endgame, and potentially that a pawn provides White's best winning chances here. Interesting. Okay, a lot of king and pawn endgame. Yeah, that is super interesting. Let's look at this. I feel like we haven't, to be fair, most games, especially at sub like master level, don't have end games. That's just the truth. Like many games don't play to an end game. So as a result, we don't generally, we haven't spent a whole lot of time looking at end games on the stream to this point. So I do feel like we should probably try to get some good end game analysis in. So maybe I'll spend a little bit more time thinking about that today. Cool. This is a queen's pawn opening with an early g3. b6 is played. And I'm kind of curious to see how many games. We're still within fairly well-established opening theory. c5 here, c4, bishop b7, and then I think White does best with continued development. No, I think that's right. I mean, I think basically, as the rating level gets higher and higher, games are played to end games more and more frequently. Best move diff. I'm kind of curious about that. Sure. I'm actually not super good with this, so yeah, that's actually really helpful. I didn't even know you could do this, to be honest. But yeah, that makes me definitely want to look at this 29. Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tarash. Um, I think I had a game rescheduled, so if you want to send it, we can go over it at the end of the stream today, Tarash. Um, Cool. Yeah. Send the game. We'll put it at the end here. Just someone. I had put someone in for 10 a.m. And that was no longer the most convenient. So, I actually have a free slot at the end of this. Um, Okay. So anyways here, so yeah, so bishop f4 here, and this overall, I think white's basically there's going to be a fight over the light square diagonal here. Bishop f4, pawn takes d4, queen takes d4, bishop c5. I think here, it's close to equality. Um, it makes me wonder if knight to c3 might have been a better route here. Knight to c3 is a more straightforward way to develop. By the way, the engine here is advocating c takes d5, trading off the c pawn for the d pawn. That makes sense too. Um, basically here, white has, or basically white's trading the c pawn for the d pawn. That's generally a good trade, um, if there aren't other larger considerations. But yeah, so I also sort of think that knight to c3, bishop to f4, bishop to g5, more straightforwardly developing moves might be better than securing this outpost early. That said, it's not a problem. It's fine on this outpost. But I think knight to c3, yeah, knight to c3 is the most popular move here. So I think that's probably the best idea. Yeah. We should. I'll play through this quickly. But I do think that following the opening principle, just keep developing, is probably the best plan in this situation. Um, CD5. Uh, yeah, CD5. Knight D5. E4. This pawn on D4. You're saying. Yeah. Um. Hmm. I'm sort of curious about how this simplifies. I don't think e4 is necessary here. Oh, the e4 pawn. Like knight f6. You're saying? Uh, Potentially. Um, yeah, knight takes d7. Maybe even. I'm sort of curious about d5, but probably not playable. I was looking at so knight f6, knight d7, knight takes d7. Well, actually, or sorry, queen takes d7. E d5 here. I guess that probably does hang this pawn. Um, there's some considerations here where you're basically trying to get the light square diagonal for both pieces. And queen takes d4, bishop c5. Yeah, white seems better. But I guess I would just say I sort of just feel like knight e5 might not be the right idea here. I think knight e5 can be a good outpost later. But here, I would just say, development is so important in the opening. The quicker development with like knight c3 and bishop e4, f4. Um, uh, yeah. Um, yeah, good question, Squash. Uh, I just, um, I agree with the Philion. I think the Philion's got exactly the right concept. Just go as long as, you know, just go as long as it's fun for you is my main concept. But I don't think you're doing anything bad, I don't think you're doing anything bad by concentrating for an extremely long period of time. I think, yeah, DC. I got you. Yeah, that makes sense. But here I think this is not bad. Uh, yeah, but I think on knight c3 you can do that, right? So with knight c3, uh, d4, knight takes d4, and I think this bishop's got a pretty good. I think this is pretty good for white. Um, D takes c4. Gotcha. Okay, so knight c3, d takes c4. I would play queen a4 here. But yeah, you're right. You do lose the bishop. Yeah. So the pressures. Right. Yeah. No. For sure, Mario. Yeah. No. This is worth looking at. Um, Queen a4, bnd7, queen takes c4, a6, or rook to c8. are given as the two possibilities. Um, Interesting. Cool. All right. Thanks, Tarash. Yeah, no, thank you for filling that slot yeah, I definitely needed one for the end of today. Or end of this morning. So cool. Um, no, I mean, it's a good point. Basically, having C takes D5 going into this pin. Um, so after knight C3, C takes D5, Queen A4. This it is better to have this pin be symmetrical or to be the first person to open this diagonal. That's definitely true. Queen A4, Bn D7, Queen takes C4, and the bishop does have control over this diagonal. That said, you can end that pretty quickly with knight E1. Uh, but Yeah, Queen A4, Bishop D7, Queen takes C4, B5. Um, let's see. Yeah, Bishop C6, Queen takes C4, B5, Queen D3. Something. Yeah. No. I think that's the way to go. Did you say you were doing tactics training for 13 hours, Squash? Uh, yeah. Yeah, no. I think if you do, I mean, I would say probably your best returns are just tactics training. Chess.com, Puzzle Rush and Puzzle Battle, and Chess Tempo, and I think there's some Chess Storm or a few others that are good. But Yeah, as someone trying to improve as quickly as possible from 1100, I would say you're seeing so much volatility in the games at that level that you basically can just look at a tactics training and stop most of the volatility from your opponent and be a lot stronger. So yeah, I would say tactics. Put a lot of time into tactics. If you're doing 13 hours a day, you're definitely putting the time in. And if you do it playing tactics, bam. Jack, Jack has used the tactics emoji, which I think is perfect use of it. It will keep at least it'll keep in mind how often I'm talking about tactics. Uh, but it was really nice of Jen to make that emoji, so now we have it. Uh, anyways, this moving the knight twice is an idea, but I think I would just stick with straightforward development. So let's see. So knight c3 b5 there potentially. C takes d5, queen takes, bishop c6, queen c4, b5, knight takes b5. Yeah, that looks good for white. But I get it though. I understand how this rook or this bishop diagonal is basically it's better to be the first person to open this diagonal. And knight e5 does that successfully. But on the other hand, knight c3, pawn takes d5, queen a4, knight d7, and you're actually in a very well explored position. This isn't bad for white. So a6, rook c8, and you have 75 games, 75 master games to choose from. This is pretty pretty safe. Uh, it's hard. I guess the main principle there is it's really hard for black to hold on to this c4 pawn. Just in general in like queen's pawn games, queen's gambit accepted and stuff. Um, yeah, that's interesting too. C takes d5, bishop e7, queen a4, queen take, or even queen takes d8. Here, yeah, that c pawn looks pretty loose, kind of tricky to maintain. But overall here, yeah, I think just straight up development is probably the most solid idea. Just out of principle. I mean, there are probably there's a lot of tactical complexity that can happen, but uh, yeah, no. I think that's completely right, Hyperion. Until a relatively high level, tactics will provide a great return on your time studying. So I'm strongly in favor of that line of thinking. I think that will really help. So yeah, so knight c3, knight d7, d takes c5, c takes d5, knight takes d5, and then like rook e1. Um, Here it looks like it's kind of a sideline where you're the second person to open this diagonal, but overall just sort of complicated. Um, but yeah, I'd stick to the fun. This is really interesting, Mario. I would stick to the fundamentals here. But I'm getting a little bit hung up on this one move, so I'm gonna just jump forward a bit. I want to take a look at this end game. To this point, it looks like you've played a pretty solid game. You have two, basically bishop pair versus bishop pair. Looks like there's a tactical improvement here. Rook to d2. Yeah, it looks like allowing rook to d2 is a problem for black, or a problem for white. So here, uh, this e2 pawn. So black has quickly gotten this kind of problematic e2 pawn, or e pawn. So here, rook d1, and then e3. So I guess I'm a little bit curious. Was there ever a potential to play pawn takes e3 here? Probably not, because it knocks your king to the h1 diagonal. It's probably better to keep this diagonal closed, especially considering how open this a8 h1 diagonal is. So here f3, rook d8, queen a4, a5, and I feel like I basically feel like this a3. Thank you, Jen. Um, Bishop c3, bishop takes. Okay, sure. Dark squared bishop. Yeah, so you're taking off his good bishop and avoiding bishop d4. Uh, yep, that makes sense. Um, yeah, bishop d4 does look like a problem. You're completely right about that. So on bishop d4, so a takes b4, bishop d4. What's the response? Um, this is tricky. Yeah, black has good control over the dark squares here. Queen a1, yeah, is gonna put some pressure on. So queen a1 is the engine move. Bishop takes d4. Pawn takes d4 is actually not extremely terrible. Like rook d3 stops most of the forward momentum here. Yeah, queen a1. So queen a1. All right. That puts pressure on this d4 pawn. Um, yeah, yeah. Bx d4 is an aggressive way to play this. Um, right. Yeah. No. I completely understand that. Rook d3 does blockade it super well. But yeah, that move has some problems. I mean, when you're using a rook to blockade a pawn, that's not usually the best use of your material. Here, this makes things a bit complicated. So yeah, so I guess this is actually the refutation, right? Though, pawn takes b4, bishop to d4, queen a1. I mean, it was not where my eyes went first. It's engine assisted here, but this continuation looks like pretty solid. I don't think, basically the issues with White's position stem from getting a D pawn, uh, and using that to advance. So here, everything trades off, but yeah, I think b4 was better, and just better for a tactical reason, which is pawn takes d4, bishop to d4, queen a1. Now this bishop's loose, and this still isn't ideal. I mean, say rook fe8, which is the engine move, takes rook takes. This king side is a bit tricky. Um, let's see. Um, Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no. Exchanges on D3 are gonna be bad. I would advise against exchanges on D3. I don't think with that rough rook to D3 move, that blockading move. So say B4, pawn takes, bishop takes, bishop takes, pawn there. rook d3. I do think it is actually pretty time consuming for white for black to get his bishop threatening the d3 pawn or d3 bishop d3 rook. So like in order to threaten the rook, black has to play bishop to c8, bishop to f5, which first takes this bishop off that diagonal, and then second can probably be stopped by like queen b5 here, and then black has to expend even more time getting rid of that blockade. Meanwhile, white will be playing like rook d1, trying to win the d4 pawn. So overall here, I think it's sort of difficult for white to or for black to maintain this d4 pawn. Um, good question. I think g3 g4 is a tricky concept. I think it does have some aspects where it's opening up the king side. This combination looks good to me. I like this a lot. Uh, so rook to d3 actually is refuted by queen e6, rook d1, queen takes c4. Okay, yep. All right, so that can't be allowed. So the move here for black is queen to e6. So pawn takes, bishop d4. This is really the key position. So I want to slow down a little bit and take a look. What should white be playing here? Um, I don't know. It's kind of a complicated question. Queen a1 is given by the engine. We saw that probably wins tactically, um, but that's kind of a lame. Coming up with like an engine solution to a problem like this seems a little bit lame. Um, I think here instead, pawn takes d4, rook to d3 has some more fundamental backing. Plus, I saw it first. Uh, yeah, I mean probably. If you can avoid if you can avoid the giving black a d pawn, that's probably good because between this bishop on the on the king's diagonal and this pawn with the discovery potential of e2, then yeah, I get it. Um, but queen a1 does actually refute it. But I want to come up with a solution. So. By the way, so queen a1 is objectively the solution to this problem. We've established that. But but I'm wondering if there's an alternative to queen a1. Either like bishop to d, yeah, either bishop takes immediately or rook to d3, queen to c6. I guess the c4 pawn becomes kind of a liability for white. Um, I don't know. It's a tricky position, Mario. Definitely interesting to think about. Um, but there is a tactical refutation. Uh, Queen a1. There's black has no response to this. Pawn takes, rook takes, and the situation was kind of basically black's attack is diminished. Yeah, no, I mean I don't know if it's forced. I mean there's multiple computer eval lines that are no, I haven't seen Naka Medyarov. We looked at Naka versus some other high level GM the other day, but I could, yeah, I'll check it out, Wampy. Thank you for asking. Um, but yeah, so rook takes, and now queen takes b4. But the main threat that we were really the most concerned about was the advancement of d4 to d3, and then a discovered threat from the pawn on e2. Um, so yeah, so I think queen a1 is ultimately best. But bishop takes b4 has some reasoning behind it too. It doesn't double the e pawns, and this makes sense. But yeah, okay, so that worked. What's the actual refutation here? Rook d2. Okay. Um, rook d2, rook e1, bishop c8, bishop takes c5. Okay, cool. Yeah, this is interesting. Here queen d5, queen takes, and yeah. Well, I guess okay. So they end up playing out great. Rook takes d1, white regains advantage, and now he doesn't have to worry about this e pawn becoming a d pawn. Cool. But rook to d2 uh is more tricky. Um, I don't know. Rook takes, pawn up, pawn takes, king h1 probably is fine. Um, but overall, I'm not sure how. Basically, this is complicated. There's a lot of play left here. Uh, hmm. Yeah, this shows a good tactical resource for black in rook d2 though. I mean, neither piece can really take it very comfortably. Um, I'm looking a little bit at bishop takes. Uh, bishop takes here. Oh wait, no. So this is prior to bishop h3. Okay. Um, e takes d2, king h1, d8, queen c2, queen d7. Yeah, overall, I guess that this is a little bit better for black. So that line is dangerous. Anyways, that didn't happen. So what I really wanted to look at in this game was the end game. Here, basically White's going to have this outside pass pawn, which is going to be helpful. Black has his own outside pass pawn, so that's something that White will have to manage pretty well. Um, but yeah, this does look like a favorable endgame for Black. Um, how does this end up drawing actually? Okay. And then black basically gives up his outside passed pawn. Well, yeah. No. Well, it's interesting. So it basically involved black giving up his outside passed pawn first. And that being a problem. I'm looking at this line, f5 first, and then the manner in which black gets in. I'm curious about. I guess having basically uh, yeah. I mean, now White has an inside track, so even with Black's more advanced pawns, White's going to have multiple moves. The having the most outside pass pawn was really helpful to White here. Uh, Overall, yeah, I'm a little bit curious though about this f5 line. Um, yeah, no, I mean, it shows that how advantageous having a most outside pass pawn is, the a pawn versus the c pawn. This gives you an extra 2 moves of tempo for the king. But oh wait, I thought you were okay. So this ended up. I think you were supposed to go for the uh wow, okay, king b3 equals. Hmm. Yeah. Well, this move I know we can improve on, right? This move here, King C3, the King B3 keeps the opposition. It would be a rare situation in which it would be better to give up the opposition here. Uh, so as long as we're looking at basically specifics, specific improvements. King to B3 is better. On any alternative, White ends up gaining time out of King B3 versus King to C3. King A5, King C4, King A4, uh, King takes C5, King takes A3, and then the White King marches over and takes the pawn and passes the F pawn, right? King A5, A4, King A6, right? Okay. Um, but this basically forces black to expend the most time. Here, uh, okay, cool, and then it becomes an opposition problem. All right, interesting, complicated. Um, yep. So by the way, so basically, I want to make this instructive. So king to b3 keeps the opposition. For anyone who's sort of who's not super familiar with these king and pawn endgame concepts, having the king separated by an odd number of squares defines it as the opposition. Hey, Darkslide, how are you? So yeah, so this is an opposition problem. A4 is an excellent tactic here. A4 forces the king back. Basically, there's no move here on which the king gets to stay on this file. The C4 is an alternative, but that pretty clearly draws. So C4, king C3, A4, king takes C4. Um, Basically, this can be used as a drawing structure. Neither side can make any advancements on the queen side, on the king side, right? These pawns are all completely locked, so there's no tempo that can be gained here. Okay. King to c4, a4. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a really good opposition puzzle, actually. So here, king to b3. The value of the opposition is going to be a sustaining concept throughout this endgame. So a4 here, and then the king's forced to move back. So king a6, um, king to b2, c4, uh, king to c3, king a5, and then I think is it king takes c4 here? King takes c4. This loses the opposition, but black still can't get in. King a5, king b3, king b5, king c3. So this basically, no, sorry, Dark Slide. We had the last one, but I think Tarash was gonna send a link for that. If Tarash doesn't send a, if hang by Dark Slide. If Tarash doesn't send a link, we'll Oh no, Tarash did send a link. No, sorry, Dark Slide. Nothing for this morning. We had one because there was a schedule change, but unfortunately nothing more for this morning. Anyways, this is a really cool endgame problem. Basically, the error here by white was allowing black to seize the opposition. Um, if white maintains the opposition here with king to b3, he can use the king as a blocker and prevent the black king from ever threatening any of his pawns. So here, king a5, king a4, king b2, um, and here this is the most obvious way to maintain opposition. Uh, Yeah, no. But I mean, this is a really interesting endgame situation. It's an opposition problem. King b3, keeps these pieces locked to each other. A5, a4, and as long as you can time it so that this king takes the c5 pawn when the black king is on a5, the white king will become a drawing instrument. I really do think this is super instructive, really helpful in case anyone here is not as familiar with king and pawn endgames. But basically, what you want to do is seize the opposition. So, in this particular type of situation, maintaining the king so that it's aligned with the other king, but one space apart. Um, uh, yeah, no, you're good. King a5, king takes c5, king a4, and this is drawn. None of the pawns were blocked or anything. Or no, there's no way to attack any of the pawns, and there is no way for any of these pawns to remove the blockage. So, it was basically all just equal. Uh, yeah, make sure you're not overheating, Mario. Make sure your game conditions are as good as they can be. Um, Yeah. So this king b3 maintaining the opposition is the way to play this. On c4, and also on c4 you don't want to play pawn takes c4. On pawn takes c4, king goes here, king goes here, king goes here, king goes here, and then I think black can get into the position. So c4. I just want to make sure I'm right about this. So I guess all of this draws. C4 also will allow white to use this kind of blocking concept and win there. Um, Interesting. Uh, cool. Good stuff. But yeah, really interesting. So White's best resources to draw here, and the game's basically decided on this move: King B3 maintaining the opposition versus King C3 losing the opposition to King A4. After this, C4, A2, C3, and White's lost, or lost in the way that the game ended. But I'm sure we'll come back to it at other points on this stream. But at the end of the day, learning this opposition concept, one keeping your king aligned with the other king. You see, like you've successfully seized the opposition here. You just need to do it on the next move as well. So like king to c2 gets the opposition, and there's no way that black can use any of his pawn moves to disrupt that opposition. King to b3 was the responding move, maintaining the opposition and securing the draw. The black king can't get into take any of white's pawns here, and white's in good shape. Um, yeah. Anyways, uh, this is a very interesting game. Some interesting tactical play in the middle. And I think that missed tactic Queen A1 was really the improvement. Here. So in terms of takeaways from this game, super instructive game. Thank you very much for sending it, Mario. I appreciate it. Here I think straightforward development is probably best for white. Yeah, no. Thank you very much for sending the game, Mario. Please keep sending them. This game has three really instructive points. Here, a straightforward developing move, knight to c3 or bishop f4 is good. Um, After that, uh, on this move, there was a tactical resource, queen bishop d4, queen a1, which wins the pawn, which was an improvement. I didn't have much time to look at it, but it was the engine that was responsible for initially finding this queen a1 move. This is a solid way to defend yourself. Um, and after rook takes here, white is clearly better. White has eliminated any threats. So instead, what happens was this trade off. And here, black's in pretty good shape. Black has a lot of tempo here to expend if he needs to. Basically both players still have bishops, but black has a lot of moves to burn in order to set up a type of favorable opposition problem. Even here, playing f5 such that setting up the situation that your king definitely can't leave, but on the other hand, it can effectively defend everything. The real error here was playing g6. G6 makes everything move in time. I mean, we basically know based on the characteristics of king and pawn endgames that this is going to come down to some opposition type situation. So here, playing g6 or playing g6 was really an error. G6 allows for black to have complete control over when he breaks the opposition. Um, when you played the king up the G file, yeah, I mean King F1 was probably more efficient. I mean King G2, was moving your king to F1 anyways. There was pretty. I don't think there was much of an opportunity to make advancement of your king up this G and F file. Um, Yeah, right. Um, but anyways, this ends up playing into a but this was the key blunder for black, and it has to do with broader opposition problems. F5 here, and black can completely control when he wants to break the opposition. So here, king b5, king b3, c5, king a5. I mean, whatever. It doesn't really matter. King a2, um, c4, and basically, you know, black can choose exactly when to have his winning pawn break. King b2, king a4, king c3, king takes, and then the black king gets behind the white king. Um, Otherwise, with king a2, um, c3, and he wins with the pawn directly, forcing the king back to the a file. So yeah, so that I hope is a little bit instructive in terms of king opposition. But basically, the idea is, forcing your opponent's king off of the direct alignment of the kings is almost universally favorable to you. That's kind of a reduced, a reduced explanation of what opposition is, but it's pretty well demonstrated in this problem. Um, a4, and basically the king can never advance here. G6 was the error here in the sense that it forced, it basically removed an opportunity for black to burn the necessary move of time to capitalize on an opposition problem. F5 here, not G6. Anyways, complicated, and I wanted to make sure that I gave that one enough time. But thank you very much for sending that, Mario. Three really generally like three genuinely instructive concepts there. The tactic, the development, and this endgame problem. But please keep sending them. If you have any endgame specifics too, I feel like we haven't spent enough time on those. So every time I get an endgame problem, I really want to take a look at all of it. But yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mario. Yeah. No, I mean, and end games aren't really that common at the end of the day. It's only a certain percentage of games that even go to the end game. But at the same time, end games are extremely valuable because they give you a sense of when it's appropriate to trade off and be ahead or keep pieces on and not, basically it gives you a good sense of when you want to trade off to secure a winning end game. If you know what the winning end game actually is, that's an important part of that calculation. Um, Here we have another game. So the Magician, I understand, is another YouTube streamer. And yeah, please send it, Mario. No, definitely, please send it, and I'll add it to the list. Probably for tomorrow at some point. I'm very curious. So here, the Magician I know is a streamer. We have a game sent against him, which is cool. And here, we have to sort of decide where, basically Black's playing a good game. So how do we capitalize on this? It's both sides played a flank opening. So here, the engine. We'll get into a situation where the engine's going to be aggressively advocating for central pawn moves to control the center. But stylistically, that's not what either side is playing for at the moment. Castles e3, e5. Black has a better center. White has strong fianchettoed bishops. White can probably play bishop to b2 here, or bishop to b7 here, challenging White's bishop. And now the center's symmetrical. Position's pretty much equal. And now Black's got a good position because he traded the d5 pawn for the d4 pawn. I've talked a little bit about the positional advantages of having the more advanced pawn, corresponding pawn here. The e5 pawn corresponding to the d3 pawn secures Black a spatial advantage. But yeah, pawn takes pawn, bishop to b7, and here, it's simplified somewhat. This open file is big. This could be helpful for whoever places a rook on it. F5, pawn takes f5, bishop takes g2, king takes g2, pawn takes f5, queen to d4. And overall here, black's going to be looking for tactical ways to respond to this. But I guess I want to focus a little bit on how this position sort of slipped away from black. F5 was a really dangerous move to play. It had some advantages to it. Definitely trading this bishop off on g2 is a trade that's going to be favorable for black. I mean, in the most simplest way, because it's white's good squared bishop and black's bad squared bishop. But f5 is going to provide white with a lot of tactical opportunities. This opens up the diagonal for queen d5 in a way that's tricky. Yeah, bishop on c5, sure. But yeah, no, I don't think that's a bad idea. I think with yeah, bishop c8 c5, I actually think that's just fine. I think in terms of looking at moves where black may have misstepped, I think f5 is the one. Bishop f8, like rook e1 probably or something, or queen d2, or even knight to e5, right? Bishop c5. If you want to do that, that doesn't cause any immediate problems or structural weaknesses. Your pawn structure is strong. But f5, I think, is just not the strongest concept here. I mean, this opens your king up to a lot of attack. I think f5 will become a reasonable way to challenge the e4 pawn later, but it'll definitely be after a queen trade, and it'll probably be after more materials removed from the board. F5, pawn takes, and because this is basically your best case scenario, right? I mean, this is sort of what you were playing for if you played f5, but this still isn't that great. This must be what you wanted, in general, if you played f5, right? Because f5, bishop takes g2, king takes g2, pawn takes f5. Okay, so you traded off all the pieces. You were intending this, and then this queen to d5 becomes sort of this queen to d5 is still playable. So for that reason, I think the ideas that you're proposing, like bishop c5, queen g5, sure. I mean that puts on a lot. Yeah, I like your plan, attacker. That makes a lot of sense. No, I think that's the right plan, attacker. But f5, only fits into that pretty tangentially. F5 is a move that does support the kingside attack, but I think a better way to support the kingside attack is exactly what you're saying, which is just just do it basically. H5, H4, and black's in good shape. But yeah, F5 is just too compromising to the king's safety. But I like the attack that you're proposing right now, attacker. I think you're in good shape with that. And then this trades off into a rook and pawn endgame. Yeah, favorable one for white. And then the rook hangs. Yeah, so rook takes a4 makes this a little bit more unclear. Still probably plus equals, but sort of drawish. But yeah, I like that middle game plan more, attacker, the one that you're bringing up. I think that's a solid thinking. So yeah, on f5, bishop takes g2, king takes g2. This is good. Avoiding this is good. So yeah, so I like your plan. So let's actually take a look at a line in your plan. Bishop f8, queen c1, bishop c5. I guess it's the engine, so the engine knows that you're about to play queen to g5. Maybe if you do queen g5 first. Or actually, the knight's hanging. This requires more moves than I thought it did. Okay. Yeah. Bishop c5, queen g5. I like that attack. I'm thinking h5 here, maybe. H5 has a lot of the strengths of f5 without the key weakness of compromising king safety. H5, h4 I think can be played. Yeah, h5, h4 looks good. Yeah. This is a situation that makes sense. I think black is in reasonably good shape until f5 is played. Let's go back a second. Um, b6. But yeah, this all is solid. I mean, I don't really have any objections to this. I'm thinking maybe yeah, no, queen, or maybe knight to c5. How about knight to c5 here? What is that? Uh, yeah, knight to c5 is best. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Um, this clears that diagonal at least, um, and moves your pieces to more healthy squares. Knight to c5, potentially knight e6, knight d4 is an idea. If b4 gets played, that is a better yes. So actually, looking at this, I think completing your development with knight to c5 is also probably better than either f5 or h5 here. Knight to c5, knight e6, knight d4 is a pretty good way to secure an outpost. This also allows you to trade off queens. One of the primary issues with f5 is trading off queens. So like let's say rook takes, rook f5. Now I think it's not good, but this is a lot more playable. The king safety is way less of a damaging problem for black on that outcome. So that would be my recommendation. That's one improvement for black there. In terms of strategic plans, like overarching strategic concepts here, um, I think I don't know. I like your idea of a kingside attack. White doesn't really have a tremendous amount of weakness here. Everything's sort of well organized. You have a space advantage, so maybe something like and this is the key. I mean, this is the key move. So for sure, 16 f5 is the key move here. But what should white be? What should black instead be aiming for as a strategic plan? Like, I think probably it's sort of. I mean, it's sort of drawish. Um, I think black should probably try to get his rook to the D file. He should probably try to post his knight on d4, and he might have an opportunity to attack what's white's weakest pawn, which is the one on c2. That would probably be the best idea. But given that the pawn structures are the material and the pawn structures are symmetrical, and there's open space in the center, I have a feeling that this is going to be a draw, best case scenario for black. But black can definitely push it with knight to c5, knight to e6, and knight to d4. Um, f5 provides creates weakness. It also worsens black's pawn structure. Here you basically have two sets of pawns, but with pawn takes you have three pawn islands, and that's definitely a relative weakness. Um, yeah, it trades off into a drawish rook and pawn endgame. But overall, I think black played a pretty solid game. I think this opening doesn't provide a ton to improve on. You challenged white and gave yourself a favorable corresponding pawn in the center. Knight d5, pawn takes d4, pawn takes e4, c5, and f5 was really black's only error in this game. There are slight other inaccuracies, but that's the only move that I actually really think can be tangibly improved upon, in with a small amount of analysis. Um, yeah, interesting. But this was an error. This was not the time to challenge e4. King safety needs to be better to do that. And if you have a straightforward knight to c5, improving your development. Um, no, I mean, in general, yeah, sure. I mean, taking the center is good. So, when your opponent plays a flank opening, like this, Taking the center with e5, I think, is the right policy. Um, but here, you basically played a move that compromised king safety without having the complete development required behind it. Knight to c5 is a full development of this knight. Knight on d7 is not, is still kind of an underdeveloped knight, not an undeveloped one, but an underdeveloped knight. This is a piece that you can very clearly improve. So you should probably do that before playing an aggressive move that potentially is double edged. So knight c5, yeah, is my takeaway on this game. Improve the knight's development, maybe knight e6, maybe knight d4. But that's a way to improve your situation here. Um, uh, this played off into something that was favorable for white. So yeah, overall, good game. I think you played it well. Flank opening versus flank opening, which is kind of strange. But yeah, F5 allowing early kingside attack was really where this game was decided. And then I think you did a good job, with white with a significant positive eval. I think you did a good job, you know, um, uh, securing a drawn end game. Um, so interesting game. But F5 was the only really misplaced move there. An interesting one. Okay, cool. So this one is yours too as well, attacker, or so d5, knight d7, c4, bishop d7, and here white's got an interesting situation. I can oh, that wasn't yours, attacker. Okay, cool. No, I think what you were saying was pretty much right. Um, I didn't realize that wasn't your game, but yeah, I think you had some interesting possibilities, but I thought that's my bad. I thought that was your game, attacker. But it doesn't particularly matter for the board or the analysis. Um, okay. Here, this is your game. Let's look. Um, okay. So you play the Scandinavian with knight to f6. Okay, I don't know this line super well. I always played queen d5, queen d6 here. Here, bishop to b4, and then there's a number of lines. Bishop to d7 is probably the most immediately challenging. I'm guessing probably the best. But bishop b5 is kind of an unusual move here. It aims to secure a gambit from black. Yeah, well, it aims to secure a gambit from black. Bishop to b5 is hoping for c6, pawn takes c6, and black is down a pawn. With slightly better bishop mobility and kind of an open queenside, but that's a complicated position. Bishop bn d7 is okay. I mean, this develops a piece. Bishop to d7 at least challenges the bishop and, offers probably a better opportunity to quickly get that d5 pawn back. Um, but black has gambited a pawn here, so now he really needs to make the most of his development. Knight f3, bishop b4, queen e7. Okay, interesting. I'm gonna look through this opening for improvements, but I'm gonna play this game out to the end just to see sort of what happened. Um, okay, cool. All right, so e takes d5, knight to f6, knight to d7, c4. This is a Scandinavian opening. The response here is a6. Well, let's see. I mean, a6, bishop takes d7, queen takes d7, d3, e6, d takes e6, queen takes e6. I mean, this is a book line. So at this point, white's on knight e2. Queen e2 is the more popular move, but knight e2, is considered to be better by analysis. Okay, so now black is equalized. Great. Um, and yeah, white's weakest position, white's weakest places here are like the pawn on d3, for sure. If you castle into this, and you'll have an immediate threat. So here, book line is still castles. Rook d1, h6 is interesting. But here, we're basically still in the book, and it's somewhere close to equality. Um, I don't know, a few different options. H6, I guess, prevents the somewhat dangerous knight to g5. All right, that seems pretty passive to me, but it's considered to be objectively the best. Bishop to d6, that makes more sense to me. That's at least a developing move. Or bishop to c5. So it seems like, of those three moves, developing your pieces seemed the most intuitive to me. Um, Bishop b4 is also in the opening book. Let's look at bishop to d6. Um, Now basically black is exerting pressure. Black's pawn structure is better, but he's down a pawn. It's kind of a tough question to see whether or not black has sufficient compensation here. Rook to d7, h3, knight h5. But ultimately, it looks like black exerts pressure and equalizes. So, I don't know. Interesting. Um, okay. Let's go back to the analysis. Bishop b5, a6, bishop takes. And here, this is really interesting. So, yeah, I mean, black's found a good way to sort of equalize materially here. And overall, this slips quickly away from white though, because here, you're better, but you're basically in a situation where there's equality, right? Here, after bishop takes f3, white's pawn structure is mangled, but he has a one pawn advantage. How does one exploit this? White also has the better minor piece here. Rook d6, rook d1, and this is tricky. I think that rook trade was good for black in terms of aiming for a win as opposed to a draw. I think black has the ability to get into the white territory here. The engine proposes rook to b6, and I'm gonna agree with the engine here. I think this is the best move for black. On d6, this rook has somewhat limited mobility. I guess knight d7 was played with rook b6 in mind, but I think black should immediately play for rook b6. If you have the opportunity to improve your rook in rook's mobility in this tangible way, I think you should probably take it. Bishop takes f6 is still a threat, and after rook to b2, where it probably goes, bishop takes f6, pawn takes f6 will damage black's king side. But I'm pretty interested in this. Yeah, so let's say so first, bishop can't play takes knight immediately, right? So say bishop takes knight, rook to b1. So that's not playable. So the king probably instead goes to the b file, right? Um, and if it goes, or it goes to the second rank. Here, rook b2, king e3, and then I don't know. It's up to you. But you've equalized materially in a relatively, in a relatively equal pawn structure. And if you take the a pawn, you're going to have a passed pawn, which white does not have. Um, so I don't know. Yeah, I'd be pushing for rook to b6 first. I think time is extremely important in these rook and pawn endgames. So getting the ability to take the a pawn is very valuable for you, and you've basically secured it. So rook to b6, and if the king moves to the second rank, you can immediately play rook b2, and then rook takes a2. If the rook goes to like f1, that's probably the best. I think that might be the best idea. Um, but king to the d file in any case. King d1, rook to b1, bishop to c1. That's kind of interesting. Yeah, but I'm not sure c5 is that. C5 has the potential to become a problem, but you can sort of prevent it with king to c or king to d7. Um, or you can sort of prevent the danger from it with king to d7. I think, yeah. Anyways, my main priority here, I think, is getting the rook into the white position and taking pawns as quickly as possible. That's what this rook is going to need to do a lot of in this endgame. So doing it with as much time as possible is definitely a good idea. Anyways, knight d7 is also fine. Bishop b7 is an error. Now rook b6, and you have kind of all the tempo in the world, and you should be winning this. Yeah, I mean, black is way up here. Um, King d8 allows for rook e4. What were the better alternatives here? I think probably a5, bishop e7. Um, this at least blocks the e file. King d8 here allowed rook to e4 to be played. That actually was pretty dangerous. So we'll just look at this rook e4 line. F5. Yeah, this is not good. I'm thinking just how how conceptually to improve this. Um, Basically the only way for white to get, yeah, no, for sure, no, I understand that. That is yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's hard to know, and it's so easy to look in retrospect. Um, yeah, so f5 I think is good. One of the most dangerous points of this situation is black has equalized materially, which is great for him, considering he was playing basically as a gambit the whole game. I think the real dangerous point is cool. Yeah, glad. Maybe we could see one of those games at some point. Yeah, thanks for the game. Um, yeah. So here I think a5 is probably the best move here. Here on a5, the bishop move is forced. Why looking at this I think is so good is because there's an issue with there's basically an issue with the white rook getting into the black king side. Um, uh, Black uh, is so here. Black is in the white territory, but white is not in the black territory. And in order for either side to successfully advance, this you know, in order for white to successfully advance, um, the he's going to need to get his rook taking the black pawns. If he's not taking the black pawns, black's just going to keep taking the white pawns, and eventually, get a material advantage. So the only route in for the white rook is through the e file. Um, so if you can, you'd want to prevent or delay that. And I think that's the strategic rationale behind a5. With a5, bishop e7 is forced. Everywhere else is covered for that bishop, and it slows down the natural move for the white rook, which is rook to e7. That's the only move I think that gets into the white territory, or that gets white into the black territory. Sorry. So bishop e7, and then I don't know, f5 or rook c2. Probably rook c2 looks like a very difficult threat for black to deal with, or for white to deal with. White rook plays to h4. Engine suggesting rook takes c3, but I prefer h5. King to d3, rook takes f2, and now you've basically secured a material advantage, and you have a way more dangerous passed pawn than any of the pawns that white has. So that's sort of how I think you can best exploit this. So for that reason, a5 I think is better than king to d8 here. King to d8, if anything, it doesn't adequately defend against king e7, so it doesn't have any strong defensive characteristics. Here, yeah, I mean here basically, now white's going to get penetration into the black king side. Yeah, no, I think it's one that you could, strategically think about and not do in the future. And I think that's because really when you're assessing the strengths of rooks in a rook and pawn endgame, penetration of the opponent's position is probably the most important characteristic. So here, the only way that the white rook is getting into the position is through the e file, or by taking one of the black pawns. But that's probably not going to happen. So getting in through the e file. A5 is a tactical move that blocks the e file. You saw that this basically you see that this move is forced, and you assess that it blocks the only white way of getting into the position. If white doesn't really have an ability to get into the position, then black is really going to make a lot of headway with his attack. So A5 was an improvement here. Um, After this, I think A5 was an opportunity at a few different points. It looks like you were sort of aiming for a checkmating threat here, maybe even with knight c5, rook to d3. Sometimes those types of threats have some value, but anyways, this this has a volatile endgame. Um, So, given that it's volatile, I think it's mostly tactical, so I don't want to spend too much time reviewing it. Um, but I guess the improvements here are things like that A5 blocking the entranceway of the rook into the black position. Um, yeah. So ultimately, even in the final position, I think there was some recovery here, right? Like rook b7, rook h7, king c8, rook h8, king d7. I think this sort of plays out as this at least gets black out of this perpetual issue. Um, yeah, avoiding that perpetual was important. Uh, you sort of need to do it. Oh, wait, actually, is this possible? No, yeah, no worries. No. I mean, it's all just practice. Um, but I'm just looking is can Black actually recover here? Because I think he had a good or White had a good Rook B8 tactic, but I assume that Black can get out of this. So here, King A7, Rook H7, King A8, Rook H8, King B7. Hey, thank you very much for the follow, Yeet. Rook B8, and then Rook B8, King A. Okay, so the Rook to B8 tactic doesn't actually work because on the next check after Rook B8, White has to expend a tempo, and then Black gets a move in without checking. So like F1 Queen now or whatever, but you actually can get out of this. I see what happened, which is that here you can't really get out of this super easily. You basically Rook B8 does force the king back to the A file. But the thing that's important is that it doesn't really advance. Like even here, what you do is you play King B7. Um, so King B7 here, Rook B8, Ace 7, and Rook H8 because he doesn't have any more checks. And then potentially what you could do is play maybe A5 isn't the best idea. Maybe it's Knight C5, but you have a move to allocate defense here. Or you can just queen the pawn and do it again. Um, yeah, no, for sure. But this ends up being a better opportunity, I think, for black than a draw. The black king can get out of this. So, anyways, it was a very volatile endgame. But yeah, I think improvement, tactical improvement's probably the best strategy to move forward and to have fewer games like that. But I really want to focus on the strategic aspects of this. The first improvement was this A5 bishop forces bishop to E7 and blocks off this entry square for the rook. So in terms of considering a rook and pawn endgame, the more you can delay the rook getting into your position, the better. You did a great job getting your rook into his position. But you could actually slow him down a lot here with a5, bishop e7. Now it's going to take a lot longer for him to get into your position with the rook, and while he's doing that, you can play a move like rook to c2. Um, yeah, you can push the passer too. That makes sense. I mean, it's up to you. But I guess I would say you want to do something that concretely moves forward your attack here. King d8 does not, is not as clearly advantageous as moving the passer with something that disrupts the rook file. Um, yeah, so yes, pushing the passer is part of why that a5 move is strong. But what I'm actually getting at here is why I think its strongest characteristic is it pushes this bishop to block the e file. So your rook is on the white side of the board, taking pawns every move or every other move. So you're doing great with that. The white rook is not the white rook is not yet able to take any of your pawns because it doesn't have the right angle. It's approaching the pawns from the front. So getting the white rook into your position is a necessity for white to basically try to equalize this endgame. A5 effectively delays it by blocking the e7 square. So a5, e7, and or bishop e7, and the rook is behind on time trying to get at your pawns on the 7th rank, while your rook is already on the 7th rank. So that's why I think that's an improvement. The fact that it's also pushing the passer is great and is an added benefit. But in terms of playing out the rook and pawn endgame, it's a great delaying move, which is super helpful to you here. And then in the final position, and I understand this was time pressure, so I don't want to take it too seriously, because I think with more time you would see this. This, just tactically speaking, you had the ability to escape this. What you want to do is you want to force the rook to b8 and take a move every time that he does that. So rook b8, king a7, rook does something that moves his rook so that he can check you on the next move, and then you you either move c2 and progress that way, but you can keep using this tactic. Rook b7, rook b8, king there, rook goes somewhere, black does something, either queen the pawn, and then rook there, king a8, rook g8, king b7, rook b8, king a7, and then rook goes somewhere, and then black does something. So you were able in that particular tactic, you were able to get a move every time, and continue to advance your position while white was busy checking you trying to draw. So that's kind of an endgame motif. Um, it's an interesting endgame study, basically, because black needs that extra move each time, and then he actually has an opportunity to get it. If white doesn't try to approach that way, if he plays rook to g7, you can play king to c8, rook to g8, king d7, and now he really has to find a way to respond. Good question, Mario. I've tried a few different things with the pawns, but one of the things that I think was really helpful was turning off animation for the board. Someone had that suggestion, and it's been a good idea. But yeah, I notice, or I know that there is some kind of blinking on the pieces. It's not ideal. I'm continuing to think of solutions to that problem. Um, but anyways, this tactic was that there were two basic improvements here. I think yeah, disco pieces exactly. Good, yes. Yeah, no, but thank you for bringing it up. I'm trying to come up with a few different things to improve the technical and administrative aspects of the stream. Since I'm getting such good luck with everybody's submitting games and having a lot of material for it, so on that side, I think everything's great. I'm really happy with where things are, but a lot of administrative and technical things that I'm hoping to get to once my class ends, and it ends today, so. Soon I'll have a good opportunity to make some improvements. Um, yeah, no. Thank you, Attacker. Please keep sending games. I'm super happy to look them over. But those are the two takeaways. Apart from the tactical stuff, I think your way of advancing apart from the tactical stuff, I think the idea of delaying the rook's entry into your position was possible there using a tactical means. and I think that would have been helpful to you. You would have been able to clear off more pawns before he was able to start clearing off pawns. That I see as the biggest change in the position. And the last one I know is time pressure, but it came into an endgame study that I think if you had a little bit more time, you would see and end up winning the game from there. Black wins this game with enough time. So I think at the end of the day, it's a good win for you. And yeah, I hope that's helpful. Please keep sending games, Attacker. Really appreciate having you here. And yeah, no. I hope that analysis provided some value. Uh, he could have forced the draw over only a mistake. Yeah, as in the end position for sure. This position is a win for black. If you see the B7 motif where he's burning, you're basically getting an extra move every time while he's burning a move. It's a win for black. I mean, the eval shows a win for black at the end of this position, so it's a good game. I mean, you played well. You're probably gonna win. All right. One last one. Or actually, we have one last one, and then we were going to take a brief look at a game that Tarash sent in a spot that we weren't sure we would get to. But yeah, so this is an interesting game. Let me just play through it. Rui Lopez, so I'm pretty familiar with this stuff. Pretty mainline Rui Lopez. And black gets kind of probably a winning end game position. Sort of equals. Tough to see exactly. Okay. So this is Rui Lopez theory. I guess we're a little out of theory, but let's see where we split from it. Here, Bishop E7, 6 games, and still very comfortably within theory here. Bishop takes E6 was where things break off. An improvement for black here is knight to A5. I think knight to A5 here, forces off this bishop. There's a few different choices here, and I understand bishop to E6, but knight to A5 trades off white's bishop pair and gets rid of white's good squared bishop for your knight on A5. Here, knight A5, and then knight takes B3 or knight takes D5 is coming on the next move, and neither of those is particularly good for white. So the in-book game goes castles, knight takes B3, A takes B3, C5, rook E1, knight E8, and now black's in pretty good shape. I bet it's close to equal, but here knight E8, bishop takes C7 is evaluated as best, but white's got a worse pawn structure. Black has a bishop pair to white's 2 knights, and basically black's looking pretty good. It's interesting. So here, bishop e6 is played instead. I understand bishop e6. It opens up this rook file, which could become a good target of attack on the weak f2 square. But trading off the knight for the bishop is probably just better than trading off the bishop for the bishop. But they're both pretty much fine. A4, b4. Here, I think white is not playing. Yeah, I think white's kind of not improving his pawn structure with this trade. He's trading the c pawn for the b pawn. Basically this pawn for that pawn. And that is not the best idea. The main point why I think this is not a great trade for white is because it's going to end up with creating a rook file attacking a pawn on an open file. So the rook will move to b8 and have threats on b2. If you go the other way, if you play a move like knight to c3 and wait for the pawn on b4 to take your c3 pawn, then on rook b8, black may still secure an open file. But you'll be able to challenge it directly with the rook, and you won't have a pawn on it. What's really problematic about this, this structure is rook b8 and then rook b2, and then white doesn't have the same open file that the black rook has. So, given the choice between these two trades, let him take you, because then you both have an open file. If you take him black ends up with an open file and white does not have an open file. The white rook is limited mobility behind the b2 pawn. While the black has plenty of mobility. So so that's why waiting for pawn takes c3 is better than pawn takes b4. I mean, it's a little bit unclear to me. It's probably a little better pawn structure too to have a set of 1 and then 6 versus a set of 2 and 5. So basically what I'm saying is here, you end up with these 2 pawns and these 5 pawns. Um, uh, Whereas if you let him take you end up in a situation where uh, if you play like knight c4, a relatively straightforward developing move, takes you have a 1 and 6, and I think 1 and 6 is better. Um, that's a more debatable point. I think the more important concept here is that pawn takes here is going to allow rook to have basically I think you would call it a semi-open file, but basically a fully open file against white's not open file, basically running into white's pawn. The rook running into white's pawn is a liability for white. The rook opposing your white rook is fine. That's my take on that. So that's why I think that this pawn takes b4 is a misstep, just because of the rook mobility and to a lesser degree because of the pawn structure. Um, Plans for white here, I think probably like, you know, maybe even already rook to b1. Um, but I like knight c4. Knight c4 seems like a reasonable outpost. I mean, the knight c4 can't get attacked by anything. And on d5 it can play knight takes e5. So I would say knight c4 is probably best. Let's see if they agree. They prefer bishop e3, but I like knight c4. Bishop e3 probably does improve the bishop's position. It pins the actually it doesn't even pin the d5 pawn, but it does improve the bishop's position. So for reasons it's hard to find a good move to play here. I lean towards knight c4. But there are reasons to not play pawn takes b4, just because of those reasons I described. Yeah, so I think that's an improvement there. Here I think b4 looks fine. I guess maybe there's a reason to not do that. Let's see what it is. I guess b4 passes the c4 pawn and then forces b5 because otherwise bishop would take b4. So the b4 pawn got a little bit overextended there. Knight b6. Actually, I don't dislike this. This is sort of fine. Rook takes, knight takes, bishop takes. It's about a draw. Maybe black's up a little. And that's what ended up happening. I don't understand knight b6 though. I think knight b6 was not a good idea. I guess it makes sense that it was knight c5 is your next move. That's fine. Should be 4. It's a draw. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a drawn game, right? So nothing too terrible there. But in terms of improvements, let's think about this. I guess I would say for an improvement, which is the main line over bishop e6. Better to trade off the c6 knight for the b3 bishop than it is to trade off bishops. Both ways you get rid of white's good squared bishop, but it's cheaper to do it with the knight. Castles, c3, knight a5, and then this is the second takeaway. B5, I think, or b4, pawn takes b4. On pawn takes b4, white was supposed to let the black pawn take his c3. I understand it's like unresolved tension there, but I would just leave it. Leaving it is better, less dangerous for white. Knight c4 instead. Knight c4, and then pawn takes, and then pawn takes. And you don't have a situation where there's a rook that has way better mobility than your rook. So that's takeaway number 2. Takeaway number three. I think everything here was reasonably solid. H6 was probably slightly a mistake. Bishop takes f6. Bishop takes f6 is probably a mistake. I mean, I don't think there's really a reason here to I think bishop e3 is better than bishop takes f6. There's not really a reason to trade off your better minor piece for black's worse minor piece. You don't really get any material out of it. If you got like a knight and a pawn, then it would be worth it. But you don't quite get a pawn out of it. So here I would just play bishop to e3. That's another thing that I would do. Be reluctant in the endgame to trade your bishops for knights. Bishops are a better endgame piece, pretty undisputedly. So you didn't. It wasn't necessary to trade the bishop for the knight here, and it didn't win an additional material. So bishop e3 is a stronger thinking. And then here, you ended up trading into a draw, which is fine. Uh, the computer, for whatever reason, has a little bit of an issue with this endgame. I don't think it sees knight d7. But anyways, it ends up trading into a draw. But I would have kept the endgame material equal there, as opposed to trading off minor pieces. So I think that those are three takeaways that I think are pretty that could be potentially helpful things to think about. Thank you very much for sending the game. And really interesting stuff. Showed the demonstration of the knight to a5, knight to b3 in the Ruy Lopez common line. And overall, very interesting. Please keep sending games my way. They're very interesting to look at. And then I just wanted to close on a quicker, maybe a half slot on this game that Tarash sent. I think this is a Tarash game, but it will be out of the Tarash. That much I know. Okay. Cool. Okay, so this is your game. All right, awesome. Thanks for bringing it up. So e4, e6, d4, d5. Cool. French exchange. c4, which is a pretty main line in the French exchange. Monte Carlo variation is what it's called. I forgot what it was called, but Monte Carlo variation on c4. Black's developing normally. White's basically playing super aggressively. And Black's developing his pieces and taking a hanging pawn. Looks good. Yes. Well, and he's shown us a few really cool Tarash games, which is good. Tarash has given very good material to the stream. Some very cool openings and this kind of thing. So I really do like the games that Tarash sends in. I want to make sure we give him enough time. This trades quickly into an endgame. So here, queen f3, knight f6, knight e2, knight takes, queen e3, queen takes. Okay, cool. So black has definitely equalized here. The engine is being pretty generous, and I guess white hung a pawn. Yeah, black is winning here. Black's more than equalized. Piece play he's about equal, but materially, white hung this d4 pawn. So I guess one of the riskier things about the Monte Carlo variation is that you do have to keep a pretty good accounting of this d4 pawn. In this particular case, white lost that d4 pawn. And then, given that white's down a pawn, he probably has better ideas than exchanging here. I think trading queens, like this move is fundamentally not the best idea, I think. Queen e3. So here, white has hung a pawn. Pawns get hung occasionally. It's not like the end of the world. But here, white decides to trade down further, down material. And I think fundamentally that's not a good plan. It may be forced anyways. I'm looking at like bishop to b3, bishop to g4, and then queen to e3 or something like that. Just because of these kind of not quite mating, but dangerous threats along the d file for black. Um, I guess that must be White's reasoning behind playing Queen e3. Is this eliminates the dangerous file threats that Black has along the d file. That's probably the logic. Here, I don't know. I mean, I guess I would just say Black's up a pawn. He played again. White hung a pawn, and I don't want to say that he should walk it in, but this is pretty good for Black. I want to just make sure that Black ends up winning this endgame, but seems like pretty smooth sailing. Yep, awesome, cool, and good tactic. Yeah, great sight here at Tarash. Nicely done. Yeah, this and this was all planned for sure. Um, uh, Tarash plays King f4 cleverly with the idea that what happens with a takes b5? I mean, it's still a mate, I'm sure, but so let's just see a takes b5. But yeah, no, I mean, you can see it was very intentional. So good thinking there, Tarash, and yeah, totally capitalized it. Perfect. Exactly the right endgame tactic to use. So good idea. Um, I just want to see on a takes b5. I assume it's similar, but b. Wait, what happens with the a takes though? Yeah. So wait, let's be careful with that actually. This played out great, but this one is yeah, a takes is dangerous. Um, so the right general concept, but a takes b5. I think uh okay. Yeah. So the way I guess to set this up instead was a6, a6 b5 that way. Hmm. Bummer. That's too bad. It was still a great tactic. I mean, you played a great tactic, given that he made that error. But, um, yeah, no, for sure, for sure. I mean, it's a great tactic. It was exactly the ladder tactic, the cool play. And I'm going through this pretty quickly too. It looked awesome to me. So, um, yeah, but A takes B5. I guess didn't have the same outcome. But okay. Um, so here B5, they're saying, and then King E6. Yeah, B6, King D7 or something, and then push the pawn. Right. Interesting. Yeah. No. That was good. Good end game there. But yeah. So here, I assume this is going to calculate into B5 being the move, but oh, the king can get back. Okay, so the king has to take on h5. This, yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, don't worry. I mean, no, don't worry about it. I didn't see it immediately either. Uh, yeah. Hmm. Um, ladder tactic for the win, and that's very literally true. The ladder tactic won here. So this worked out. This worked out great. Um, but the earlier endgame, the earlier b5, with the a takes. Let's just make sure that there's something here. And for well, the ladder tactic is basically the method by which black maneuvers here. So this this repeated checks basically forcing this over. But yeah, king h8, sure. Uh, okay. Maybe there's not enough of a win here. Hmm. Okay, win for black. More errors here than I would have thought. Um, Bummer. Okay. Well, I actually have to run and go to class. This endgame analysis was a little bit rushed. I would take a look at it yourself. Yeah, cool game. No, thanks. Thanks for that. Yeah, I made some errors in this endgame analysis. I'd take a look at it. Eh, I don't know. I was doing it quick, so don't worry about it. Would be my advice. But look at this one that Tarash set up. There's not a this is an interesting endgame that I just can't give justice to in this amount of time. Yeah, I disregard most of this because I saw Tarash's win, got excited for him, and unfortunately didn't give the best analysis there. But yeah, I'm not too worried about it. Have a good one, Tarash. Thank you very much for joining the stream, and feel free to keep contributing material. I'm definitely enjoying it. Thanks. Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. Back at 6:05 p.m. Eastern. Thank you very much for joining the stream, everyone. Yeah. Anyways, have a good one, guys. See you later. Thanks. Thanks for the game, Mario. Please keep sending stuff my way. Thanks. Bye.